In this tutorial, we're going to finish off our shape transitions exercise by creating our audio keyframes composition that looks like this. Now, what's interesting about this composition is that its animation is driven completely by the audio. We don't have to create any keyframes. Let's see how we do this. I'm going to open up my blank audio keyframes composition. And you can see I have my audio file and blue background. Let's create the shape that we're going to be using. I'm going to come to the layer drop-down menu and select New Shape Layer. And from my toolbox, I'm going to choose my ellipse tool. And I'm just going to click and drag in my composition while holding down my Shift button a circle that is roughly about half the size of the composition, like that. From my Align panel, I'm going to center it horizontally and vertically to the composition. I'm going to make sure that my shape has no fill and a stroke of white, as I have here. But now the width of my stroke is currently set, for me anyway, at 21. Now, it doesn't really matter what we set this to right now, because as we will see, it's this value that is going to be driven by the audio file. So we don't really need to worry about this just yet. Once we have that shape created, I'm next going to select my audio file in my timeline panel, and I'm going to twirl this down just so that we can see what's called the waveform of this file. And if I zoom in, you can see the shape of the waveform here. Now, as I drag my current time indicator across here, at every frame, this waveform has a value. It's not displayed here, but we can take the value of this waveform and convert that into keyframes, and then apply those keyframes to other shape properties, like the line width. Let me show you how this is done. I'm going to twirl that back up again. I am going to make sure that this audio layer is selected. I'm going to convert this audio file's waveforms into keyframes by coming to the Animation drop-down menu, and underneath Keyframe Assistant, I'm going to choose Convert Audio to Keyframes. And what has happened is a new layer has been created right above my audio layer called Audio Amplitude. Let's reveal the properties of this new layer. You can see that there is now a new property here called Effects. I'm going to twirl that down. Underneath that, I can see that the audio has been converted into its left channel and right channel, which is the stereo property of this audio file. I also have this property that has converted the left and right into one channel. And in fact, this is all I really need. I don't need these left and right channels for this effect. So I'm going to select both of these and press the delete button until all I have is this both channels property. And as you can see, this both channels property has underneath it a property called slider. Now, don't get too worried about what this slider means, but essentially what it's done is it's taken the waveform of that audio file and converted that into a single numeric value and created a keyframe with that value. As you can see, as I move my current time indicator across my timeline here, how that value changes. What we're going to do is we are going to take this value and apply it to the stroke width of this shape. Let me show you how we're going to do that. First of all, I'm going to zoom back out of my timeline so we can see all the keyframes of this animation. I'm going to bring my current time indicator back to the beginning of my timeline. Let's reveal the stroke width property for shape layer 1. I'm going to reveal its contents properties. Under ellipse 1, I can see I have the stroke 1 properties. I'm going to click on that and reveal those. Let me just open this up a little bit more. Now here is my stroke width property. And what we're going to do is we are going to use our pick-whip tool, or some people call it the parenting tool. The pick-whip allows us to determine an object's properties by parenting it to another layer's properties. In this case, this new slider property that we created here from the audio channel. And we do it by dragging the pick-whip of the property that we want to change and dragging to the property that we want to use as the driver. As you can see, by doing that, the value for this stroke width property is now in red. Whenever we see red values, that tells us that this value is now being driven by an expression. And we can see that expression by twirling down this disclosure triangle. And I can see now that this layer's property is now being driven by the both channels slider. I'm going to twirl that back up. If I want to see what that looks like, I'm going to click in my composition window here, and if I press my spacebar, okay, that's not bad. However, the stroke width is still kind of thin. In the example that we were looking at earlier, the stroke width was much thicker. Now this is where things get interesting. I'm going to bring that back up so I can see this a bit better. Now that this stroke width property is being driven by the little bit of code that we have here, we can modify that code by clicking with our cursor at the end of this expression and multiplying this property's values by 10. I'm going to press the asterisk for multiply and then type 10. And I'm going to click again once into the composition window. And you can see now that's looking pretty good. Now, if your circle is too small or too large, of course, you can always select that shape layer's scale property by pressing S and scaling that up or down as you need to. But mine's working pretty good at 100%. But we also saw from the example that we also were able to apply the dashed line effect and have that driven by the audio file as well. So again, I'm going to reveal that shape layer's contents, and I'm going to reveal the stroke 1 properties. As I scroll down, you can see one of my properties is the dashes property. By default, there is no dash on a stroke until we add it. So I'm going to press the add button, and I now have that dash property. And you can see that the dash property is controlling the number of dashes that I see at any one time. By default, my default value here is 10, which I believe is 10 iterations per line segment. I'm going to have this property driven by the audio file as well, again by taking its pick whip and dragging it over top of the both channel slider and releasing. And you can see now that value is in red. And again, it is the same value as the slider. The stroke width, of course, because it's multiplied by 10, is 10 times that value. If I press the spacebar, you can see what this does. Now that's kind of interesting, and we didn't really have to do too much to create that effect. But the real takeaway from this lesson is the value of working with pick whips. We can parent any layer to another layer, but what's really interesting is that we can parent any single layer property to any other layer's single property. This really opens up a lot of possibilities. I'm going to come back to my main composition,